Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wilson Centre. I'm Andy Marshall. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Centre. Welcome, thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased indeed, delighted to welcome Robin Cook back to the Wilson Centre. He's an old friend of the Centre, he's a former board member, many friends around the place who've asked after him. We're really pleased that he's here today. Robin is here today to talk to us about his newest book, Cell. Do we have a copy? Which, amazingly, is his 33rd novel, is that correct?
Yeah, my 6th grade teacher would be shocked.
Cell is a gripping story that focuses on the potential of the smartphone as a medical tool and the risks that we face as this new revolution in health technology takes a hold. I hope that many of you saw the books as you came in. The books are there to purchase. They're right outside the auditorium, and Robin will be available after the event to sign copies, I hope.
Just the Cell. No, any book I've written, but no.
Well, he certainly won't be signing all of the copies that he sold, because Robin has sold over 100 million copies of his books worldwide, which is all the more remarkable when you think about the nature of the subject matter, which is often very serious indeed. So some of the titles: Fever, Outbreak, Terminal, Fatal Cure, Toxin, Shock, Seizure, Critical, Coma. These are very serious books, and one way of looking at Robin is that he has created a new approach to exploring some of the most cutting-edge issues in modern medicine today. Issues like genetic engineering, in vitro fertilization, drug research, organ transplantation, and stem cell research. But another way of looking at Robin Cook, and we were talking about this, is that Robin is just a terrifically good writer who happens to use medical themes for his novels. Cell is a terrific read. I thoroughly recommend it. Robin is, I think, first and foremost, a tremendous storyteller, which is something that I hold in great esteem as a former journalist. We were talking about pacing, about the way that you take a reader through often quite difficult material, his ability to tell a very good story. But Robin is also a doctor. He's a graduate of Columbia University Medical School, and he finished his postgraduate medical training at Harvard. Robin knows his stuff. And Dave Rajewski, who will also be in conversation with Robin today, also knows his stuff. Dave directs the Science, Technology and Innovation program here at the Wilson Centre. He works on the scientific and technological frontier, looking at public policy challenges that emerge as science advances, including issues like synthetic biology, nanotechnology, citizen science, geoengineering, and the application of computer games to public policy challenges. In previous lives, Dave worked at the White House Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of Science and Technology, as well as EPA. And I know how excited that Dave was that Robin was coming here today. We've been talking about this for a while, and about our shared interest in fiction and its ability to explore serious issues like this. And I know that I'm really looking forward to hearing the two of them talk today. So without further ado, take it away, Dave.
Okay. Great, thank you. And thanks for coming, Robin.
My pleasure.
I can't pass up the question of going back historically, kind of how you started. And you wrote your first book in a submarine.
Yes.
And I think I'm trying to imagine what your submates were thinking as you're writing that. But
well, they always wondered, where was the doctor? Well, in a submarine, the interesting thing is that I was on this operational patrol, and we were underwater for 75 days. And if you stand a watch, which I was initially asked to do, because if this doesn't scare you, nothing will. I was the 3rd highest ranking officer on the submarine. And you stand a watch for 8 hours, and not a lot happens, because you're only going about 6 knots and about 600 feet. And but then there's another 16 hours to go, and you can only sleep for maybe 8. And so anyway, it's a great opportunity to write. In fact, a lot of doctors come up to me and say, I've decided I want to write a bestseller. Can you give me a little, just to get me going? And I say, sure, volunteer, join the Navy, volunteer for submarines, and then you'll do well.
So after that book came out. A few years later, you published Coma, which was turned into a movie, and then there were 33 books total. And I did the math, and that's almost a book a year. And during that time, you were actually practicing medicine.
Yes.
And I'm trying to imagine how this worked, whether you were taking notes on your prescription pad. I'm trying to, I can see this would be pretty complicated in terms of writing and actually being a doctor at the same time.
I guess, but you know, I approached writing the same way I approach medicine. And what I mean by that is that I never had doctor's block. I never woke up, the moon is just not in the right phase, I can't see patients today. And I approach writing the same way. I know a lot of my other friends who do have supposed writer's block. I just never gave myself. I would set aside this amount of time, and that time I would actually write.
So let's talk a little bit about Cell. When I read the book in December, I read a proof. And when I was reading it, I thought about a phrase that actually is from Peter Drucker, the management guru. And somebody asked Drucker, how do you predict the future? And Drucker said, I don't predict the future, I just look out the window and see what's visible but not yet seen. And there's a certain amount of that in this book, that there's an awful lot of interesting things that you've seen that we all should be looking at. And I wondered if you can talk a little bit about what some of those things are and why you wanted to get people's attention.
Well, it's interesting. That has come up in that all my books, in a certain sense, some people think of them as kind of a little bit futuristic. But I can say that just about every book I've written has come to pass. So I believe that Cell, what I write about in Cell, is going to come to pass. And one of the reasons I believe it is because it's already happening. And that is that if you ask a group of people like yourselves, if I asked you, if you had a medical question, how would you answer it? And I know what just about all of you would say, that you'd go online and you'd look it up. Now, you don't realize how different that is. And it's shockingly different, actually, because previously you had to go to the high priests. Those were the doctors. You had to find a doctor, get a hold of him, call him up, or she, and wait for 3 months. So suddenly, I mean, the previous book that David alluded to, I wrote a book last year called Nano, and when I finished that book, and I was really, really impressed with the capabilities of nanotechnology and how it's coming into medicine, particularly in terms of sensors and whatnot. And then knowing what I did about informational technology and knowing what I do about genomics, which for the most part hasn't filled the bill. Remember back, I think it was 98, we had, Clinton had Collins and Venter in his office. We've conquered the human genome, everything's going to change. Well, what's happened? Nothing's happened. Everybody is kind of thinking, well, this is really, they were filling us a bill of goods, it just didn't happen. But now it's going to happen because we're having these 3 technologies coming together at the same time. And I actually literally woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, not last summer, but the summer before last, and I said to myself, I know what's going to happen. And that was the origin of the storyline of Cell. And in this is that the digitalization of medicine, that is taking advantage of all 3 of these technologies, and putting them together on the smartphone platform, linking them together in terms with an algorithm that, because we already have 50,000 medical apps today already, but none of them have been linked together. If you link them together, and you can actually form an avatar doctor. And I thought, my gosh, not only is this going to happen, but it's actually going to be pretty darn good. You know, we doctors always have had the joke that I forgot half of the things I learned in medical school. Plus, I found out that half the things in medical school that I learned were wrong. Now, we always hope they're the same half. Well, your eye doc is not going to suffer from that at all because it's going to be updated on a daily basis. So, at any rate, that's really what Cell is about the fact that that we can combine these three technologies in a way that could not have been anticipated as, like 5 years ago. And suddenly, we're going to have something that can solve one of the biggest problems about American healthcare. Well, healthcare in the world, actually, is we do not have enough primary care physicians. And when you think about the Affordable Care Act, a lot of the critics of that act say, how can you dump or put in 30 million more people into a system that's already not functioning very well? You can't, and it's just going to make a bad situation worse. So IDOC and the Affordable Care Act actually will go together like peaches and cream. So anyway, that's sort of a general idea about.
I was actually reaching in. I've got a little cabinet of old technologies, and I was reaching into it this morning, and I pulled this out. This is actually a gene chip that was given to me 10 years ago. And you can remember, I think, some of the promises of this.
Right.
So this was a device that was going to read, it was not a whole genome, it was going to read part of your genome that
Right.
might be susceptible to some sort of problems. And there was a little space there where they were going to put a nano-based laboratory,
Uh-huh.
right, which never happened.
Right.
And I asked the person that was developing this, who was investing in it, and he said, a cell phone company.
There you go.
So I basically used to go around and say, okay, let's imagine these two things together. You spit in it. It was saliva-based, and basically it goes into your cell phone, and the cell phone rings, and it says, do you want the results? And a lot of people were really freaked out by that.
Yeah.
A lot of people said, no, don't want it, right? But I think that's something that's becoming more possible, because we're actually to the point now where, because of nanotech, we can actually do microscale or nanoscale laboratories. But I guess it hasn't stopped me from asking the question, who wants the data? And some of the data, as you know, is deterministic. A lot of it's probabilistic. You might get breast cancer, you might get prostate cancer. And I think that was when I was reading the book, I was sort of asking myself, how would IDOC talk to people?
I think it will talk to people very directly. And for the most part, I think that's what people want to hear. I don't see any problem with the IDOC talking to the person and say exactly what you're saying. This is. I cannot guarantee that this is going to happen, but the chances are such and such. But the whole idea that this is going to do several things to medicine. One is that it's going to democratize it. It's going to put all of us in the driver's seat. We're going to control our own health data, et cetera. And because up until now, we've been really held hostage by the stakeholders of the healthcare system. That's the physicians, the hospitals, big pharma, device makers, and medical labs. And I'm sure a lot of you read the Time piece by Brill about hospitalization, and I mean, it just makes you mad. And this opportunity is going to free us from being in the clutches of these stakeholders. None of those stakeholders are going to like this idea. Physicians aren't going to like it because it's going to be competition. Not specialists, but primary care, anybody that goes into primary care. But generally, physicians have been against solving the problem of primary care. So they're going to be against this. Hospitals are going to be against this because it's going to lower hospitalization rates. If you can monitor everything you can monitor in a hospital on your own cell phone in real time and have your doctor talk to you, why be in the dangerous place of the hospital? Big Pharma is not going to like it because it will look at your genomic data. And today we use population statistics to decide whether or not you take some specific drug. And usually you're thrown into a group by some laboratory test or a series of symptoms, et cetera. You're thrown into this group, and then Big Pharma comes along and has a medication for this specific set of symptoms or this sign of the laboratory test. But population statistics might show that only 5% of people actually get a benefit. Who takes the drug? All 100 people take the drug, and Big Pharma loves that. With the smartphone being in charge, it will know whether you're in that 5% group because of pharmacogenomics. So you'll only take the drug if it knows that you're going to get a benefit from it. So Big Pharma is going to hate it, because then 95% of their sales was going to disappear. So all the stakeholders are going to be against it. Then you might say, well, then it's not going to happen. Well, this is going to happen just because of what I said before. We all now get our information from the internet. This is going to happen like a tsunami. It's going to take over. The FDA is going to try to block this too, but they're not going to be able to do it because you people are going to make it so that it happens, because this is going to work. And if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with some sort of chest pain and you think, which side is my heart on? Oh, it's on this side, and I have the pain on this side. Oh my gosh, maybe I'm having a heart attack. It scares you enough so that you start sweating a little bit, and you think, oh, sweating, that's also a symptom of heart attack. And then you say, all right, it's 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas morning, I better call my doctor. Good luck. Well, in this circumstance, your phone will be right there, and your doctor, your avatar doctor, will be looking at your EKG. It will know your blood pressure. It will know your breathing rate. It will know just about everything in real time, right then. And it will say to you, your EKG is normal. There's no sign of any heart attack. Why don't you take a deep breath? And you take a deep breath and you say, does that make it feel any different? Yes, it feels a little bit better. Well, you've probably squished a little intercostal muscle. And so my recommendation is that you turn the light back off and go back to sleep. Now, instead of trying to get your doctor, instead of getting up and getting your spouse to take to the emergency room where you have to wait for 6 hours, you just go back to sleep. Now, that's just an example. But this is the type of thing that's gonna come.
So when I was reading the book, I was thinking about another app called iLawyer. And the iLawyer app evolves because iDoc makes a mistake. It was, leave it to the lawyers will figure this out too. They probably won't do it as fast as the docs, but I'm wondering what will happen when we actually have some error that occurs. I mean,
well, I couldn't have written a thriller unless there was an error, right?
Right. Yeah. So, the other group of people that are going to love this are the big internet people. So, in the past month, both Google and Apple have been to the Food and Drug Administration, and we know at very high levels. Google is supposedly working on a contact lens that will measure glaucoma levels for diabetics, and one can imagine that's a fairly short wire between that and an insulin pump. Who knows what Apple's doing? But Tim Cook has been promising some breakthrough in hardware at some point in time. And I pulled a job position from the Apple website. This is from February 6th. They want a user studies exercise physiologist at Apple. Good understanding of physiological monitoring equipment, measurement techniques, and interpretation of results. Design and run user studies for cardiovascular fitness, et cetera. So this is Apple Computer now. Obviously coming, we don't know what they're doing, but I can imagine that. I was thinking of Amalgamated Healthcare, which is your group.
Right.
Whether that's going to sort of morph into Google and Apple or some combination thereof. Because certainly when people are thinking about the Internet of Things, they're thinking about us as a thing almost. We become something that's being monitored. Have you thought much about what happens when those folks get involved?
I just assume they already were involved because I see this as a natural progression of the benefits of these technologies and coming to really solve a problem that's a real problem. And it's worldwide. It's not just in the United States. This year, I heard or read that they expect the number of cell phones in the world to reach the population of the world, and then with Moore's law saying that computing power doubles every 2 years, but that was without the input of nanotechnology and genomics at the same time. I think the changes that are going to come with this platform in terms of healthcare is going to be extremely rapid. I mean, there's already 50,000 apps available today for monitoring various health-related issues. But nobody has actually tried to actually coordinate it and pull it together into an algorithm. The way I've set it up in Cell, there is a backup sort of call center of specialists, not primary care physicians, but specialists. And so that the app or the algorithm knows that if it hasn't dealt with a specific issue, that it should refer it on to the call center and then the experts. But the app is done so that it can then incorporate that information the next time that question comes up.
I think the number next year, I think, is about 500 million people worldwide that'll have health apps on their phones, which is a really astounding figure if you think about it. And the other response I had to when I was reading this book, I went to see a movie called Her. This is a movie about somebody who downloads an app into their computer and essentially falls in love with the app. It's a combination essentially of it's cognitive computing. Uh-huh. It's voice recognition and machine intelligence. So the application really almost takes on the feel of a real person. And the thing that was interesting about that in the book was that the machine starts to actually become a surrogate human. Mm-hmm. It intrudes. I mean, we talk about the computer as, driverless cars helping us find parking spaces, but all of a sudden there it is. It's in terms of the doctor-patient relation, it's a very private sphere. And so I found that disconcerting. I mean, it really got under my skin in both cases. And I wonder, whether that's going to be, there's going to be a bunch of people that don't find that problematic, and there's a bunch of people that do, just based on your reactions to, or the reactions I had when actually these sort of machine learning becomes a surrogate human.
Well, I see that definitely as a possibility, especially because I've been somewhat interested in people's response to their persona when they relate to the social media. And some people find that that's a lot more beneficial than actually meeting people. So what you're talking about is an extension of that. There's definite downsides. I mean, there's a downside to the internet because there's all this information out there, but, there's no way of knowing which is correct and which isn't correct. So that's a downside, too. So maybe everybody here could write a novel because you can think up all sorts of different possibilities or problems. But I think that's actually good, which is good to think that way because we should anticipate this. And by anticipating it, I think deal with some of the possible negative consequences. And one of the negative consequences in Cell is that the algorithm actually works too well, and it starts to include things that are unexpected. Because in a lot of ways, medicine has not really taken into consideration sometimes certain issues that really are important for us when we become patients. And that is like side effects, pain and suffering, et cetera, in terms of treatment modalities, et cetera. And in Cell, that's what happens is that the algorithm actually works too well and then by putting all this information comes up with a decision that's not a decision that we probably would have made in the beginning.
I mean, the other piece of the technology package that you have are implantable devices. And I remember going back and I looked at, there was a article in Time magazine, I think it was actually a cover in 2002, on a family that was called the Chipsons. And there was actually a verb called to chip people, I don't know if you remember this. And these were people that basically had subcutaneous radio frequency ID tags inserted right here. And the idea was that, if they ended up in an emergency room, someone would scan them and all of their medical information would be attached. And some of these were used by, people like Michael Jackson and whatnot so they could be found if they were kidnapped. But there was a whole industry that was starting to think about what this would do. And obviously there's medical devices that we put inside of people. And there are big advantages in terms of patient compliance, getting the right doses. But in your book, they really become small and quite capable. You want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, we see it already. I mean, obviously, there's cancer treatments. We have insulin pumps. We have opiate pumps.
Right, and these can be inserted, and I just see that as a blossoming technology. Everything is becoming miniaturized, especially with nanotechnology, et cetera. So I just see that as part and parcel of the same situation. And in fact, I believe that nanosensors will be very quickly available to even be injected and be able to communicate with a smartphone from inside your body. And this is not even dealing with the idea of nanorobots, which is another issue altogether. But it's coming, and it's going to be coming quickly. That's my biggest message. I think when people read Cell, I think they're going to think about medical care and medicine in a very different way.
So one of the policies that's in the book, and everybody knows this acronym, HIPAA, I found quite interesting because the doctor in the book, George Wilson, was trying to find out what was going on. There were people dying, and he kept running into this law, which is designed to provide privacy protection. How do you think this is going to all interact with the HIPAA laws?
It's going to make it very difficult. That's one of the definite negative sides to all this, is that if all your information, all your physiological data in real time, your genomic data, your history, et cetera, is all available in the cloud, so to speak, it means people are going to have access to it, and that can be very disastrous in certain circumstances, particularly even if there's laws against discrimination in terms of employment. And it's certainly a big argument in the sense of universal health care. I mean, so that it can't be that the insurance company is going to find out what you have, so that they're going to either not insure you or get rid of you. I mean, I've sort of written about that in the past. It's going to make, that's one of the biggest things. I think that, and a lot of people will suddenly feel that, wait a minute, this is not going to work. You're going to lose the human touch. A lot about medicine is one human being dealing with another, and that's a lot of the reasons that people like myself went into medicine, because that's part of the attraction, and that people are not going to accept this. Well, I disagree, because I think that people will show that access and availability will trump that human touch. I'm sure it's good when it works right, but the accessibility and access is going to trump it.
So the book it's been out, I think 2 weeks now. I wondered if you had just anecdotal feedback along two axes. One is colleagues that are in the medical profession, what they've said to you about it, versus just people that could be potential patients. And the other axis is just age, whether young people react differently than older people. I mean, I grew up in a family that had a primary care doctor where he knew us for 30 years. He did house visits. So I can actually remember there's a whole different referent for me that probably is missing from an awful lot of younger people. Have people given you any feedback?
Well, I did send it out to a number of people. I made a little bit more effort with this book than I have with my previous books, in the sense of getting it out to a number of people to see if I could get some feedback. And I sent it to a number of academic physicians, for instance, and their response was a certain amount of amazement, in the sense that now that they read it, they hadn't really thought about it that way, and but no one has really thought about it as something as a bad thing, really. Of course, the people that I've sent it to, I didn't send it to any primary care physician. I sent it to all specialists, which are, I guess, most of the physicians that I know are specialists. Several neurosurgeons, for instance, a couple of eye doctors, a couple of cardiologists and stuff, people like that. Nobody's responded that negatively, but I'm not really surprised, because I've always been a little bit amazed with the writing that I do. With coma, for instance, I was a resident at the Mass General Complex, and my fictional hospital was called the Boston Memorial, but everybody knew it was the Mass General. And I had my fictional chief of surgery live in a house in Weston, Massachusetts. That was in Tudor style. Now, little did I know that Dr. Jerry Austin, who was the chief of surgery, lived in Weston in a Tudor house. And when I found that out, I go, oh my God. And, I was just a resident. What was going to happen here? He loved it. I could. And then later on, I wrote a book called God Player about a cardiac surgeon. And when I was doing the research, I realized that I hadn't done any cardiac surgery for several years. And I thought it might be good for me to go back and, check it out. And I called a friend of mine who was chief in St. Louis. He said, yeah, come on out. And a few days later, I found myself all scrubbed up, trying to hold this for him and, tie that. And anyway, I wrote that book, and that book is not very positive about cardiac surgeon personality. So I sent him an early copy, wondering if he would ever talk to me again. He said, oh, you nailed it. You got it. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question. I didn't get any negative response. I think when people read it, they realize that it really makes sense. And medicine is changing. The entire paradigm of medicine is in change. And I'm talking about the paradigm that started with Hippocrates. It is changing now. Starting with Hippocrates, we shouldn't even call it health care. We should call it sick care. Because that's what we do in this country and all over the world. We wait for somebody to get sick, and then we try to alleviate their symptoms and hopefully cure them. With this convergence of these technologies, we really have the opportunity the first time to really do health care, and that is to really promote prevention. Your phone, like this, iDoc, would know 2 or 3 days before you have a heart attack and be able to call you. Say, hey, your doctor, listen, I hate to tell you this, but on Tuesday, you're going to have a heart attack. I can tell because there's certain metabolites that are in your bloodstream right now. And I would recommend that you go see your cardiologist. And if you don't have one, I can give you a list. Or go to your nearest emergency room and let me talk to the doctor.
I mean, the other thing that the phone might provide is a fairly quantifiable and comparative analysis of what the costs are when you go into the emergency room.
Yes, wouldn't that be interesting?
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yes, for sure. I think because there would be access to all that. Nowadays that hospitals are even being forced now to publish their master list, and you would be able to figure it out.
And that could obviously make a lot of hospitals fairly nervous.
Oh, absolutely. No, I am sure that all the stakeholders are going to be against this change.
I'm also imagining a combination of this with the Uber app that'll allow you to get the emergency squad at any time. And they'll, of course, charge you a premium for that, but it'll get you to the hospital very quickly. I think some of the other things that I was thinking about is is this going to lead to kind of another generation of, people call them iPod chondriacs, right? They're people that almost have too much information about themselves. We have this quantifiable self movement now where people they're collecting everything they can possibly get about themselves. And they're actually, enjoying all of this information. But given the fact that, people, they may overuse WebMD and stuff, are we just going to push the switch and have a lot of hypochondriacs out there that are...
I think they're already there. And this might give them a real fleeting frenzy, but I don't think it's necessarily going to create them. I think a lot of people will find it very reassuring to know that they have access to this kind of circumstance with their data. It's not like, and I think also that it might even have a very beneficial effect for other things that we physicians have really failed to do very much about, like addiction, or even like smoking. Your avatar doctor will know instantly if you have a smoke, and or even like with blood pressure. Someone goes to their doctor, and their doctor takes their blood pressure. You say, your blood pressure's high. Oh, I'm sorry, I know, I should have done this, I should have done that. Doctor tells you, all right, now let's do this, let's do that, let's do that. And sure enough, you do that for 2 or 3 weeks, and your blood pressure goes down. And then you don't go back to that doctor for 3 months. And after 2 or 3 weeks of being fairly good, you start sneaking back to the old ways. Well, with your avatar doctor, if you start sneaking back, it's going to give you a call. And, you look at it, oh, there's the doctor. Oh, my goodness. You just had a drink. I mean, that kind of immediate feedback, rather than waiting for 3 months to have your blood pressure taken again and then see that it's elevated. I think immediate feedback will be a lot better if people really are serious about dealing with an addiction problem, whether it's smoking or drugs or alcohol or weight.
And what about, I think the implication is obviously there, but what about diagnosis? I mean, I think the numbers are maybe 15 or 20% of people are misdiagnosed. If there's, people at IBM are hooking up Watson now to people at Sloan Kettering in the oncology department, I think. And so I think the promise of some of the machine learning is that, if you have an area where there's deep knowledge and complex decisions, that could be very helpful.
Yes, and I think that will be because your avatar doctor will have access to Watson. So maybe you could go on Jeopardy and,
So what's the business model? I mean, that was quite sort of how are companies making money on this? I mean, is it going to put all primary physicians out of work? It was kind of clear there was this amalgamated healthcare group there that was producing this, and there was a bunch of docs in the background that were providing some feedback to the machine intelligence system. But I didn't see a lot of people employed. So I'm trying to figure out kind of where.
Well, the specialists will still be there. And they might not be quite as busy, because as a specialist myself, one of the problems with our system is that as a specialist you end up seeing too many people that you shouldn't be seeing. Hopefully that would eliminate that. I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Just sort of how the money was being.
Oh, yes.
Was it largely? I mean, obviously, amalgamated healthcare was getting ready, I think, to go public, or it could potentially make an enormous amount of profit.
Yes. One of the things, part of the Affordable Care Act, is that it's empowering a profit-making industry, the health insurance industry. That's my biggest complaint about it. And one of the ways of dealing with that, they decided that the health insurance companies have to pay out 80% of their premiums in actual health care. Supposedly I didn't read this, but it's someplace in the 10,000 pages. And my thought about that at the time was they'll figure out a way to get around that. And in Cell, the company figures out a way that it decides that if they're the ones that really pay for the development of iDoc, and then they use it, that there'll be a small fee for every time you chat with your doctor. But since iDoc would be a subsidiary, their subsidiary, they would end up paying themselves. And so they could get part of that 80%, they'll be actually paying themselves. So it's sort of a clever way of dealing with that issue. As I said earlier, I think all the stakeholders are going to be angry with this because it's going to mean a significant revenue drop for hospitals, for big pharma, the medical profession, the medical devices, and biggest of all is the industry associated with medical labs. I think your phone's going to be able to do everything in real time. And so if you hold any stock in your portfolio, I would advise you to sell it and put that money into some of these startups that are going to be responsible. It's going to be a huge revolution, and it's in the process of happening right now. And it's exciting in a lot of ways. I think it's not going to decrease the number of people that go into medicine. If anything, I think it might be a boon to that. One of the shocking things for me when I was in medical school, I realized early on, which is why I said to myself someday I was going to write a book, is it was pretty clear to me that this was a different body of businesses and whatever than I expected. And so that's going to be changing in that I think that the whole business of the health industrial complex or whatever is going to take it on the chin. So governments will probably be pretty happy.
That was my next question. Anyone from the Food and Drug Administration here? Sort of, right? Yeah. I was trying to imagine FDA is obviously becoming, very interested and somewhat vigilant about, some of the genetic testing companies, medical applications. Are we likely to see this as being regulated by FDA or some part of it? Is the government have a role here?
I think the government will try to have a role and be more reflective of the opinions of the medical profession. In the past, their points of view, I think, have coincided pretty well. But with this, I see it as there's going to be a dichotomy because for the benefit for the people, for instance, to talk about your issue about who owns your genomic data, the medical profession seems to be fairly in unison in the sense that they don't think you deserve to know your genomic data, which I find personally an affront. And in fact, in the book, I make a sort of an association. I think that we're sort of at a crossroads now, somewhat similar to the crossroads in Western culture when Gutenberg printed the Bible. Suddenly the Bible could be given to everybody. Now, the priests didn't like that, I don't think. They had kind of that was their niche. And in some respects, this is the same sort of circumstance right now. We're going to democratize medicine, meaning that you people are going to own your own data. And you should have your own genomic information. And you should recognize that you can't say specifically for a specific individual. You can just talk in terms of percentages or something like that and sort of have some sort of basic understanding. I think people are very capable of being able to deal with that kind of an issue. And so I don't see it as a problem. I think there are other people that do. And the FDA now does, sort of reflecting the medical profession, who is saying, we should not give patients their genomic data because they won't understand it. Well, tell you the truth, I know most of my doctor colleagues don't understand it either. So that's really not a good explanation. And in fact, I think it's given everybody the Bible. and let you can still go to doctors and get them to interpret it, etc. Or you can interpret it with Watson. Watson will do a lot better interpreting it than a real doctor, because that's really what computers do the best. To shuffle through 3 billion base pairs and figure out, all these SNPs here, there, and everywhere, and what the association is, and that's what computers really can do, and do it very quickly. Doctors, a real person, you can only hold so many in your, and you'll have to look it up. You'll have to go online and look it up. And I don't see a problem with people having that capability, and also being able to discuss it with their avatar doctor.
Well, we've got some mics, I think, and I thought we'd open up for questions, just so you can order your eye doc. Right, yeah, right back there.
And speak directly.
Yes, hi, Rob Lever. You seem to be talking about this only in positive terms, but when you read the book, I don't want to give too much away, but you can certainly come away with the conclusion that it's evil, or it can be taken over by someone evil, or that it could run amok. And can you tell me, tell me your thoughts on that, and if you believe that will come to pass as well?
Well, I alluded to it earlier, in the sense that I found out early on that when you write a book with medical issues, if you don't make it fun to read, nobody's going to read it, which was the fate of my first book. And so to make it fun to read, you do have to go in the other direction. Personally, I think that this is going to be a big benefit to mankind and medicine, but there are going to be bumps in the road. And when I was thinking up, or trying to dream up the storyline of Cell, with a thriller, you essentially have to have a bad guy. And I suddenly realized that here I had to come up with a thriller with no bad guy. Now, how can I make it seem like there's a bad guy? And that was really the challenge for me in terms of developing a storyline that would be fun to read, keep you going, little bit of mystery, the things that make people enjoy books or movies or whatever. It's a constant struggle, to tell you the truth. And it's not as easy when it's finished. It seems like it must be fairly easy. That's at least what most of my doctor colleagues seem to feel. And that's why they suddenly decide they want to write a bestseller. And it takes a lot more thinking about and planning about. I think in Cell, it sounds like you did already read it. It's I don't like to give it away either, because part of the fun of it is that there are some twists and turns that you don't expect, which is what happens in this style of book. I think it's going to be a positive thing, but there are going to be some bumps in the road, which David has tried to bring up, and the two major ones are privacy and the loss of the human touch, etc. Those are the two that I think are probably the biggest. There had been also a number of articles that I had seen in various and sundry journals about the concern about hacking into medical devices. And that certainly was in the back of my mind as well. And in a way, no, I can't even say that. I was going to say that it's something like that in this book, but it's not. That's almost too simple. I think what driving the story here is a little bit more sophisticated and a little bit more complicated.
We had just an anecdote. We had a meeting here about 10 years ago, right downstairs, and with science fiction writers, and Arthur Clarke was sort of there, beamed in from Sri Lanka, and somebody just asked him. He says, "Why are you sci-fi writers always writing all of this dystopian stuff?" And he just had a 2-word answer: it sells. Yeah, that was
what I should have said.
It was pretty simple. Yeah, over here. Yeah, right there.
Okay, there you go.
Hi, couple questions. One is going back to futuristic medicine. Who will write the prescriptions? Would it be the eye doctor, or would there eventually have to be a human being to, call Walgreens?
Well, yeah. In the book, I have iDoc writing most of the basic prescriptions. In fact, one of the examples I give is someone wakes up in the morning knowing someone in their office has strep throat, and they feel a little scratchy, and they look at themselves in the mirror and say, "Oh my goodness, my throat's a little scratchy." They talk to iDoc, and iDoc says, put a little saliva on your touch screen over in the right-hand corner. I'll give you a little circle. You put that, and within seconds it will tell you whether you have strep. And if you do, it will say, okay, you have strep. I'm going to send a prescription to your local pharmacy, and so pick it up, and then I'll check and make sure you take them the way you're supposed to.
I mean, the overuse of antibiotics is a huge issue.
It is.
Even if you could get that one
Yeah.
under control.
Yes.
Any more questions? Yep. We'll get you a mic here just so everyone can hear.
I've got 1,000 questions for you. I actually started a company that is developing a nanotechnology-based diagnostic device using interstitial fluid, and I won't go into all that. My question has to do with the process of writing. I was in a car accident, and so I can't do a lot of other things, so it's kind of like being in a submarine. But the question I have is, mine it takes place in the future, and it has to do with global warming, and I have gotten into looking at climate change science so hard that I'm not writing the story anymore. And I'm wondering if you have any tips. How do I get out of this tunnel that I have found myself in and start writing the story again?
Well, Dave and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. I'm lucky because I've had a long-term relationship with an editor, and when I'm writing, and I'm writing a scene, it's almost like she's sitting here on my shoulder and saying, "Okay, now, pick it up." I mean, And the other thing is that I have a wife who is my worst critic, and she does not have any technological training, and so she's the first one that I show, particularly a chapter or something that involves some technological issue. She's the first one that reads it, and it always stimulates an argument. She said, "I don't understand this." I said, "What do you mean you don't understand? It's so clear." "I don't understand it," and she'll throw it back at me. And I go, "Oh." So anyway, then I go back and I rewrite it. If you constantly try to think or put yourself in the position of your reader, what we novelists and newspaper writers try to do is we try to write something that's going to be read. Isn't that what you said, Richard? Richard was a newspaper person, journalist, and he mentioned that earlier on, and that's true, because if you constantly try to think about that, you have to rethink what you learned in college. When I went to college, my main goal was to get good grades, because I wanted to go to medical school. How do you get good grades? You get good grades by impressing your professor who grades your paper, or your graduate student or whatever. And when you write for the general public, you have to throw that out, because you don't want to impress your reader. You want to entertain your reader. You want your reader to stay with you. You want your reader to have a little bit of fun, because otherwise they're not going to read it. And it's interesting because it's the whole idea of why I started writing novels. A lot of people say, why are you writing novels? Why don't you write, op-ed pieces or nonfiction or something like that? And my mother told me that too, and she was really very, insistent upon it for quite a while, until I bought her a condo. Because if you do get to certain numbers, you have the resources then. So she thought then suddenly that I guess this is okay. She would go around to various bookstores and rearrange their stock.
It did take care of your medical school debt, right?
Yes, it did. It did indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, right back there. Up, back 3 rows, right, yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Stephen Smith. I'm also had the privilege of growing up with a physician who actually did house calls back in the old days. But the question I have is, this seems like a no-brainer, but I was watching the news recently, and a report came on that said, well, people who go to the hospital or the emergency room on the evenings or the weekends have much more likelihood of not receiving the care they need, the higher mortality rates. And this seems like a no-brainer. But obviously, medical care physician or healthcare givers probably prefer to work 9-to-5 jobs as much as anyone else. So I guess my question is, I haven't read your book yet, got a copy right here, but could you imagine an eye doc giving advice to the extent of, where should you go at this particular time of day? Which facility would have the staff that you need, cardiac care staff, available at this time and in this day, and as opposed to going to this other place across town, where should you go? Could you imagine that type of service being available one day, or?
I can.
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. In fact, especially if you're driving yourself, or I could see IDOC helping, like if you get thrown in the back of an ambulance and the IDOC says, "Hand me to the driver." One of the problems when we were residents, I've been very lucky to be in very good institutions, but we knew, and this is part of why I started writing. We knew that within a certain radius that there were hospitals that really were bad. And it's somehow we were never given the sense that we had any responsibility about that, which is, I think, is a mistake that the medical profession has made. That medical profession should have taken more responsibility early on, because we are supposed to be a profession. That, and also I think the medical profession should have been the one to decide who should get licenses rather than the state. Maybe some people might argue about that too, but I think that this kind of all that information can be put in. U.S. World News Hospital. Which ones are best, and you get in there. And you say, okay. According to U.S. News and Reports, it's worth an extra 15 minutes to get to that one. But it's this type of information that the public should know this. The public should know which hospitals are good and which ones are bad, which doctors are good, which doctors are bad. The medical profession has done a miserable job in terms of even approaching that, or even when we were residents, giving us any feeling like we had a certain responsibility as being doctors to not do something about that hospital. I remember, after doing a surgical residency, while I was an eye resident, I could moonlight and to try to pay back some of my medical school debt. So I would moonlight at some of these hospitals. And I was filled with so many different stories. I just couldn't believe it. I remember getting called on a heart stoppage situation in a hospital, a couple of, 5 miles north of Boston, 5 miles north away from the Mass General. And I go running up there, and I did everything and got the heart going again, and everything seemed to be okay. And then I said, can I have the chart? I wanted to find out, why this person had a heart attack or why the heart stopped. And the nurse handed me the chart, and the person had been in the hospital something like 12 days, and there wasn't one entry. There wasn't a history of physical. There wasn't one entry. How can somebody be in a hospital for 12 days and have no entry in the chart? By that time at the Mass General, the chart would weigh about 80 pounds, with all the times. It was, so that's part of the reason that actually started writing in the first place. Coma was the whole purpose of Coma was to scare the living daylights out of people, to realize that everything wasn't the same. There were, like, for instance, in Coma, the bad guys were the doctors. And everybody was shocked. How can the doctors be the bad guys? And people would ask me that. And I'd say, well, it's interesting that you mention that. I said, because all the doctors have read it. aren't surprised at all.
Yeah, let's do one more.
I'm curious, because this is all data-driven, how can you ensure that the eye doc is getting accurate information from someone who may have early dementia or someone who may be having a psychotic episode? What kind of quality controls would it have?
Wouldn't that be interesting? I do talk about that a little bit in the sense that that they could probably deal with some aspects of mental illness. I do talk about that. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. How much do they think that possibly can be put into an algorithm in terms of how an avatar physician, what kind of questions would you ask and what kind of response would you get? And then how to associate, especially if the response has nothing to do with the question. And so, I think you can think of all sorts of interesting things like that. I think that that this kind of technology is going to have applications in areas where we don't think it will. I think hacking or that kind of thing is a more of a realistic concern than dealing with real data per se, or then. The idea is that iDoc would send you to an emergency room or a specialist if you need it. They're just trying to function as a primary care physician.
Okay, yeah, we'll do one more question, and then we can, yep.
Yeah, I'm a freelance journalist here who did quite a bit in medical journalism. I guess I have some questions about having had a difficult time getting diagnosed with Lyme disease, having written about the hype around hormone replacement therapy, having gone through various cycles on different kinds of drugs, PSA for prostate, all kinds of monitoring and other things. It would seem to me there would need to be some kind of regulation or updating on the apps that are allowed to go out, because there is even people, when I was a reporter, hyping their Alzheimer's drugs, by trying to manipulate stocks at Warner Lambert and things like that, by getting journalists to write about them. There's all kinds of potential abuses, it seems to me, that are already out there, from dietary drugs, supplements, all kinds of things.
Well, I think that my idea in Cell is that the data that it's connected to is evidence-based medicine. And, of course, that would eliminate all alternative medicine. Gone. I personally don't think there is anything. There is no alternative medicine. Either something works or it doesn't work. The whole issue about supplements is something that troubles me deeply. And in fact, I did write one book about alternative medicine. It was called Intervention. But it so happens that the book I'm writing right now deals with this issue again. My idea, however, is that the information, the data that that iDoc is associated with is evidence-based, meaning those kinds of controversies that usually, I think you've nailed it in the sense that it's at their base is usually an economic idea or someone trying to make a buck. And we have a strange situation, particularly in this country, because of the strange area or arena that megavitamins and supplements exist on. They're not a food, they're not a drug, so they don't get regulated at all. To me, it's one of the biggest jokes on the public, and unfortunately, there have been some laws that have been enacted that to keep them from being tested either for content or for efficacy. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it is it's an important issue, and so I just think that my idea that Cell would just deal with evidence-based medicine.
But I think they put out what they call 20 years make decisions about hormone replacement therapy based on what is their genetic family history and the evidence-based science that is out there. Ditto mammograms, ditto prostate disease.
These are legitimate.
Changes.
Yeah, these are legitimate debates, and indeed it can change the idea of what is correct. In other words, what evidence says is the best way to proceed. That's very different, I think, where there's a legitimate argument and a legitimate debate versus other arenas like supplements and megavitamins. And also those other things that people claim can do enormously good things, but there's no if they are investigated, legitimately investigated, they supply their own supposed source of information. But if they're legitimately investigated, which now our government has spent $1.6 billion investigating a lot of these claims, and none of them turn out to be correct. So there's two things. I think that in IDOC would be trying to deal with the most up-to-date information, even if that tends to change over time.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our. Robin, thank you very much. Get the book.
Thank you.
I think you're willing to stay around and sign some books.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we have books outside. Use it to guide your next stock investments.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
That was